Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the highlands of medieval Ethiopia, where money doesn't jingle, it clinks, crumbles, and occasionally melts in the rain. You'll wake up with a chill in your bones, the smell of charcoal in your nose, and the oddly satisfying weight of salt blocks tied to your waist like precious cargo. No wallets here. No coins clinking in pockets. Just slabs of mineral wealth that double as currency and triple as makeshift stools when markets get crowded. You're about to follow ancient salt trails through rocky valleys, meet traders with questionable maps, and find out why a chunk of sodium chloride once bought you a donkey, a haircut, and a wife, though not necessarily in that order. It's a story where roads are dusty, camels are grumpy, and the economy is oddly flaky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far away or very late at night, let me know your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake just before dawn in a stony highland village tucked beneath the ragged ridges of the Ethiopian escarpment. The air is crisp, pine-scented, and thin enough that your breath makes little clouds in the morning light. You're sleeping in a round stone hut with a thatched roof, the kind that creaks in the wind and smells faintly of wood smoke and sheep. Outside, the village is stirring. You hear the grumble of camels before you see them long-necked ornery, beasts being coaxed to their feet by traders in saffron robes and threadbare cloaks. Their hooves clatter on the worn stone paths, kicking up dust that glows golden in the new sunlight. Each camel carries not grain, not cloth, but something stranger, rectangular slabs of salt, carefully packed between ropes of straw and leather. They shimmer faintly with a crust of morning frost, looking for all the world like giant edible bricks. You reach out to touch one cool, dense, surprisingly heavy, and flinch as a trader barks a warning. That's money you're pawing, not pantry goods. These aren't just any salt blocks. They're amole, the mineral currency of Ethiopia for centuries. Uniform in size, about the length of a forearm, and value, these salt slabs are the lifeblood of the region's economy. Portable, recognizable, and perhaps best of all edible in a pinch, amole function like oversized, sodium-rich credit cards. You trail after the caravan as it winds out of the village. The sun crests the ridge, warming your back as the path drops steeply into a valley cut with deep shadows and gleaming stones. The traders move with practiced efficiency, checking ropes, calling out prices, occasionally stopping to reposition and askew saddle or rebalance a slippery salt load. The camels, predictably, complain the entire way. You pass fields edged with dry stone walls, women grinding grain in front of their homes, and children waving, half curious, half mocking. One boy runs beside you for a while, clutching a piece of dried goat meat and shouting something about salt ghosts. You don't ask. At the first rest stop, the traders sit and light a fire. They brew dark, bitter coffee so strong it could polish a blade and pass around bits of flatbread. You chew slowly, feeling the salt on your lips, the wind on your face, and the sheer weight of this mineral currency settling around you. One trader, an older man with a voice like gravel, tells you that even in the time of Queen Gutted, yes, the one who supposedly burned oxum salt, was already currency. Long before coins, he says, salt was the king's tax, the merchant's purse, the herder's dowry. Historians still argue whether the amole was used across all of Ethiopia or just in specific highland regions. But one thing's certain, where there was salt, there was trade. And where there was trade, there was someone trying to cheat you out of your salt. You watch as one trader carefully unwraps a bundle of cured meat and places it beside a pile of amole. Another man eyes the stack, counts it twice, then 3 times. The exchange is wordless but exact. You wonder how often people break off tiny flakes to tip for a favor or accidentally spend too much by overestimating a block's worth. As the caravan moves again, you see more salt changing hands, given for tools, for cloth, for promises. You begin to realize just how weird this system is. Valuable? Yes. Logical? Sort of. Convenient? Not in the slightest. Try buying a spool of thread with a 10-pound salt brick. Then try getting change. A boy runs up beside you, balancing a small bundle of dried chilies. He offers a trade chilies for a thumb-sized chip of salt. You agree, break a flake from one of the blocks, and watch his eyes light up like you just gave him gold. You bite a chili in return. It's hotter than your past mistakes. That's the thing about this world. Everything tastes stronger, smells sharper, feels rougher. Salt is the axis around which the economy turns, but it's also everywhere. In sweat, in the soup, in the prayers of those hoping for enough of it to get through the next dry season. You rest that night near a caravanserai, lulled by the sound of bells tied to camel necks and the soft hum of traders telling tall tales by firelight. One man swears he saw a bandit turned into a pillar of salt for stealing from a monastery shipment. Another laughs and says salt never stays put, it always finds a new pocket, a new pouch, a new purpose. You fall asleep wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, your dreams flavored with minerals, trade winds, and the strange comfort of a world where wealth crumbles in your hand. The caravan wakes before the sky even hints at dawn. You're roused by the soft clank of salt bricks being repacked and the grumbled curses of a man trying to untangle a camel's lead. The fire is just embers now, but someone's already heating a pot of coffee so strong it might melt a spoon if they had one. You sip yours from a carved wooden cup, gritty and smoky, but it does the trick. Today's route takes you higher into the mountains, toward the salt's point of origin, the Danakil Depression. It's one of the hottest places on Earth, though. Mercifully, you're not going all the way into the infernal basin just yet. Instead, you're following a tributary trade path where the salt slabs, freshly mined and partially dried, make their way from camel train to merchant to household. As you trudge uphill, you start to appreciate the weird, contradictory nature of this salty economy. Salt is both everywhere and nowhere abundant in some areas, but backbreaking to extract, refine, and transport. The traders carry it not just to sell, but to survive. Some chew slivers to fight off heat stroke. Others use it to preserve food, or barter for safe passage through unfriendly territories. The path narrows into a series of switchbacks carved into the hillside. You pass narrow terraces where farmers squat in indigo tunics, pulling onions from the earth with steady hands. One pauses to greet a trader, who offers a chunk of amole in exchange for a bundle of herbs and a chicken that looks equal parts confused and annoyed. Deal. You watch the exchange happen smoothly without any need for coinage or counting systems. The salt is judged by its size, cleanliness, and smoothness. Perfectly rectangular bricks fetch the highest price, while crumbly or misshapen ones might be passed off to children or travelers. There's an entire etiquette to it, and you're beginning to pick it up by osmosis. A young woman walks past with a woven basket on her head and a toddler wrapped on her back. She balances a bundle of salt wrapped in palm leaves beside some lentils and a string of smoked fish. You catch a whiff of the fish and momentarily regret all your life choices. Mid-morning brings a surprise, a checkpoint. It's not official. Exactly, but the local noble who claims ownership of the land has posted a pair of guards to collect a passage toll. The guards wear faded rust-red tunics and carry spears taller than you. They smile in the way that makes you check your pockets, even though you don't have any. Each trader hands over a thin slice of salt smaller than a full brick, but still valuable. You're told this is a road right, the salt equivalent of a toll booth. You quietly wonder how much salt evaporates into the hands of middlemen between mine and mouth. One trader, a wiry man with teeth like river pebbles, explains how the salt is also used to pay taxes. The king doesn't want your coins. He says he wants your salt. Coins melt, salt lasts. Which isn't strictly true, since salt also melts if it rains. But nobody brings that up. Historians still argue whether these checkpoints were genuine tax collection points or just glorified. Extortion stops. Some records suggest kings dispatched scribes to count and catalog the salt trade. Others think local warlords simply seized the opportunity, recognizing that where there's salt, there's power. As the sun climbs higher, you stop at a plateau, shaded by a few struggling acacia trees. The traders unwrap flatbreads and goat cheese and pass around a rough bottle of honey wine. You take a sip and instantly regret it. It tastes like regret and wet socks. But you smile politely. Nearby, a group of children are playing with small salt slivers, pretending they're livestock. One has even built a pen from sticks and is arranging his salt goats by size. You're not sure if this is adorable or a commentary on the commodification of mineral wealth. Probably both. Afternoon comes with a shimmer of heat on the stone paths. The landscape becomes more desolate, less green, more rock. The salt feels heavier now, and the traders move slower. You pass a crumbling stela from a forgotten kingdom, half buried in dust. No one stops to look. Salt waits for no historian. You think back to the coffee village, where a single block of salt could buy you a woven shawl, a chicken, or even a night's lodging. But here in the highlands, the value of amole shifts like the wind. It's not a fixed currency. It's a cultural one. Salt means different things to different people. Food, trade, offering, survival. One man tells you that salt is also used in wedding ceremonies, gifted from groom to bride's family as part of the dowry. It shows you can feed her, says with a wink, and if she doesn't like you, she can throw it at your head. You crest a ridge just before sunset. Below lies a trading village, its huts clustered like spilled dice across a flattened hill. Smoke curls lazily from cooking fires. You hear the sound of drums and the occasional bray of a donkey who clearly wants no part in any of this. As the caravan descends, you see the village market beginning to form. Traders pull their salt bricks from packs and stack them in tidy rows, arranging them like merchants at a gem show. Buyers begin to appear, appraising bricks with the same seriousness one might reserve for fine jewelry. The sun sets in a smear of ochre and pink, and you sit on a log beside a flickering fire. Someone hands you a bit of boiled root and a story about a man who tried to fake amole by carving bricks out of limestone and rubbing them with pig fat. He didn't last long. Turns out, counterfeiting salt doesn't end well. As you fall asleep beneath a borrowed wool cloak, you realize just how essential this odd, glittering substance has become. It's more than trade. It's culture. It's power. It's a flaky, sometimes soggy, deeply human way to understand value. The next morning, you wake to the sound of bargaining, not shouting bargaining. That rhythmic, sing-song back and forth that seems to rise and fall like the wind, except instead of whistling through trees, it hums over bundles of grain, bolts of cloth, and bricks of salt. The village market is in full swing. You stretch, brush ash off your sleeve, and wander between low thatched stalls as traders and townsfolk haggle over everything from dried peppers to donkey saddles. There's even a man selling bright yellow turmeric paste, swearing it'll fix anything from joint pain to marital disinterest. At the far end of the square, the salt stands gleam pale against the earth. Some are still wrapped in reed matting. Others are stacked like books, edges aligned with almost obsessive precision. Each brick tells a story. Where it came from, how it was carved, whether it was dried properly. Whether someone accidentally sat on it halfway up a hill, you hover near a stooped woman with a saffron shawl who is examining a brick with the same scrutiny a jeweler might give a sapphire. She gently taps the corners, checks for smoothness, then gives a small, decisive nod. A trade is made, 1 amole for 2 clay pots of fermented milk and a string of roasted crickets. You try not to look. Too horrified. The system is ancient, but remarkably efficient. Salt doesn't need translation. It has weight. It has form. It doesn't spoil. It can be carried, hidden, stacked, broken, or reshaped. You're starting to see why even kings preferred it over coins. One trader you've been shadowing, his name might be Tesfaye, or maybe that's just what people shout when they want his attention, shows you a trick. He takes a small sliver of salt, crushes it in his hand, and lets it fall into a shallow bowl of water. Pure ones dissolve clear, he says. Fake ones turn cloudy. You're not sure if that's science or superstition, but it looks convincing. Historians still argue whether salt quality tests like this were widespread or just a bit of showmanship for tourists. But it's easy to imagine a society developing rituals to defend the integrity of such an important currency. Pass a group of boys playing a game with salt chips, flicking them into a carved wooden grid etched into the dirt. One lands squarely in the center, and the group erupts in laughter and clapping. Someone hands you a chip to try. You miss wildly, but they cheer anyway. Participation trophy, medieval edition. As the sun climbs, the salt deals grow bigger. Merchant from a coastal town arrives, offering fish packed in palm ash in exchange for 10 bricks. He counts them like poker chips, stacking them on a painted cloth that shows signs of frequent salt contact, frayed, crusted, and oddly stiff. His donkey, clearly unimpressed, munches on a basket of mango peels nearby. You notice that not all amole are created equal. Some are pristine white, even, sharp-edged like a freshly baked tile. Others are chipped, grayed, and flecked with what might be camel hair. You're told these second-rate bricks often get broken down into salt coinage, smaller slices, used for everyday needs like paying a midwife or bribing a gatekeeper. And, of course, there's the salt tithe. A small group of robed men gather near a low stone building, each depositing a brick into a larger pile beneath a woven canopy. It's the local church's salt collection donations given in faith, gratitude, or, let's be honest, hope that the rainy season will go a little easier this year. The priest blesses each brick with a quick chant and a splash of rose water. It smells like salted perfume. You sneeze. Later, Tesfaye tells you about salt's other use as an oath object. In disputes, 2 parties might break a brick together, sealing an agreement as sacred. Salt remembers, he says, tapping the side of his head. You break salt, you don't break the promise. Apparently, if someone breaks the deal, the insult isn't just personal, it's spiritual. And speaking of deals, you witness one. That stops you mid-step. A tall man in a teal robe, merchant, perhaps, or noble's agent, pays 20 full bricks for a pair of ivory hair combs and a bolt of red-dyed cotton. 20. You tried to calculate what that would buy you back at the coffee village, and your head spins. Trade here isn't about fairness. It's about timing, location, and desperation. Nearby, a woman crushes salt into powder with a stone pestle. She explains that powdered salt is used for rituals, cooking, and even medicine. If your child won't sleep, she tells you, rub a little under the pillow. The dreams will run away. You don't know if that's folklore or desperate parenting, but you file it away just in case. As the sun begins to dip again, market activity slows. Traders count their remaining bricks and tie them carefully back into leather bundles. Deals are sealed with hand clasps, nods, and occasionally the gift of a handful of dried dates. You're offered one. It tastes like dirt and molasses. Somehow, You want another. You help Tesfaye load what's left of his stash onto his camel. He offers you a ride, which you decline after watching the camel try to bite its own tail. Instead, you walk alongside, shoes crunching over salt dust and chicken bones. A breeze kicks up, carrying the sharp tang of fermented grain and something vaguely like onions. You're told the next leg of the journey is the long stretch southwest haggling, more hiking. The real money, Tesfaye says, lies in the coastal cities where salt becomes fish, fish becomes gold, and gold becomes story. But that's for another day. For now, you tuck a small, broken flake of salt into your satchel. Just a keepsake. Just a reminder that once, somewhere between the highlands and the market, you watch people build an entire economy from something that melts when it rains. You leave the village the next day at dawn, walking in the amber light behind Tesfaye and his lumbering camel, which smells like a barnyard argument and hums like it's trying to remember a forgotten song. The salt bricks are stacked carefully. On woven mats over the beasts hump 3 rows deep, 5 bricks across, wrapped tight with leather straps and bits of frayed cloth. You're told that a misstep or bad knot could mean shattered salt, a ruined load, and a very expensive trail of crumbs. No pressure. The road south is less a road and more a suggestion, just dirt tracks through high grass and the occasional groaning wooden bridge. Every now and then you pass another caravan going north. Camels, donkeys, barefoot herders with long staffs, and one man hauling a sled by himself, sweat shining like oil on his brow. Everyone has salt. Some stacks are fresh and white, gleaming in the sun like chalk. Others are dark, muddy, water-damaged, probably picked up cheap, maybe salvaged. Tesfaye glances at them and shakes his head. Not real amole, he mutters, and you realize, even in the salt world, there's a black market. You stop to rest beneath a sycamore tree that looks older than every debate about salt combined. Someone's carved tally marks into its bark, maybe tracking seasons or journeys or marriages. A boy sells roasted chickpeas wrapped in banana leaves. You trade a song you barely remember for a handful. Not a bad rate. That night, you make camp near a wide bend in a slow-moving river. You help gather brushwood while Tesfaye sets up a crude lean-to from palm fronds and a torn wool blanket. The camel stares at you while chewing with judgmental intensity. You stare back, equally unconvinced. Dinner is millet porridge and a few slices of dried meat you try not to question too closely. Tesfaye sprinkles a bit of powdered salt on top and offers you a pinch. Real salt, he says. Tastes like truth. You smile, but take it seriously. It does taste better, somehow. Or maybe it's just hunger. Later, as the fire burns, lo, you ask Tesfaye how he got into the salt trade. He shrugs and tells a story involving a failed wedding, a stolen ox, and a cousin who owed him 5 bricks. You're not sure if any of it is true, but the rhythm of his voice is hypnotic. You fall asleep listening to the camel snore. Morning brings fog. It clings to your clothes, seeps into your shoes, and makes the salt bricks sweat. You worry they'll melt, but Tesfaye assures you they're safe. Salt fears rain, not mist, he says. You're not sure if that's a proverb or a weather report. The next stop is a checkpoint of sorts. Just a single hut made of mud and sticks, manned by a sleepy man with a reed pen and a dog that might be alive. Every caravan stops here to declare their goods, pay a fee, and receive a clay token stamped with a mark you can't quite make out. Tesfaye gives him half a brick and a nod. Border tax, he explains. Salt moves, but not for free. Historians still argue whether these checkpoints were official or just opportunistic toll booths, but they were surprisingly well respected. You imagine the wrath of a dozen camels denied passage and decide not to ask questions. Further south, the land shifts. The trees grow taller and the insects louder. You start seeing signs of the coast fishermen with net baskets, fish hung to dry on crooked racks, and children with shells braided into their hair. One girl offers to trade you a polished shell for a single salt flake. You give her two. Her smile is all teeth, several missing. Salt here is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. Fish is abundant, but without salt, it rots before you can say sashimi. Every village has a salt mat where bricks are broken and powdered by hand. Women crouch over mortar, pounding rhythmically, creating clouds of white dust that sting. The eyes encoat the ground like flour dot in one fishing village. You're welcomed with a bowl of sour broth and a slice of salted yam. The broth is challenging. The yam is incredible. A man named Mamo invites you to watch him cure a batch of fish. He rubs thick salt into the flesh like it owes him money, then wraps each one in palm bark and buries it under hot coals. 3 days, he says. Then feast. You ask how much salt he uses per week. He shrugs. All of it. He laughs, but it's not a joke. Salt here is life medicine, currency, preservative, ritual. That night, the fire crackles under a sky smeared with stars. Tesfaye tells you about coastal traders who try to fake amole by mixing salt with clay. Fools, he mutters water. Finds truth. He stirs a pot of boiled beans and hands you a cup of warm palm wine that tastes like fermented. Socks and joy. You fall asleep to the distant slap of waves and the murmuring of sea wind through thatched roofs. Salt is everywhere on your tongue, your skin, your thoughts. You dream of a world paved in white bricks, where trades never end and everything tastes like truth. The next morning, you wake to the low, steady rhythm of waves lapping the shore and the faint crunch of feet on packed sand. Tesfaye is already up, checking the camel's pack and grumbling about someone stealing his sandal during the night. Whether this is true or part of his usual sunrise dramatics, you're not sure. You help him reload the salt, each brick handled with care, like porcelain teacups or poorly trained grenades. The coastal air has left them slightly damp at the corners, but they're intact. The journey must go on. You're heading to a larger port town today, a place where salt doesn't just feed fish or flavor soup, it fuels trade routes, marriage. Dowries and local politics dot as you walk. Tesfaye tells you that some people in this region once paid taxes in salt. Not just traders, he says. Farmers, priests, even musicians. You picture a court bard being asked to cough up 5 bricks for a poor lute solo. It's oddly satisfying. When you reach the port, it's alive with sound crates thudding. On dock planks, children shouting over crates of dried lemons, gulls screeching like tiny angry bishops. There are boats here from everywhere, reed canoes from the wetlands, great planked merchant ships from Arabia, and tiny paddle skiffs piloted by elderly men with permanent sunburns. Salt changes form here. You see fine powder packed into gourds, granules stored in knotted silk pouches, and even carved shapes tiny salt turtles, birds, and teeth sold to superstitious sailors as lucky charms or protective tokens. One vendor offers you a fist-sized sculpture of a lion made from pressed salt dust. You admire it but pass. It crumbles slightly in the breeze. Like most promises in port towns dot, at the heart of the market stands a tall man in saffron robes who identifies himself as a broker. His job? Weighing bricks, testing purity, and arranging trades. He smashes a bit off Tesfaye's best piece with a polished stone, then places it on his tongue like it's a communion wafer. He nods, satisfied. True amole, he declares. Tesfaye beams. You watch the broker negotiate with a merchant from the north. She's offering blue-dyed cloth and brass buttons in exchange for 6 bricks. After a series of hand signals, nods, and exactly 2 silent stares, the deal is struck. A boy runs off with the bricks on a cart that looks like it's held together with hope and beeswax. Salt doesn't stay still, Tesfaye says, watching the cart disappear. It has legs. You wander into the administrative quarter of the port, where ledgers as big as dinner tables record every trade. An old man with ink-stained fingers explains how salt prices rise and fall with the monsoons. Rain ruins bricks, so the price climbs. Dry season, it drops. Simple. You ask if anyone's tried to corner the market. He cackles. Once, he lost everything, even his sandals. Tesfaye shoots you a meaningful look. Historians still argue whether coastal markets like this one were centrally governed or functioned more like cooperative anarchy. Either way, they worked. Bricks moved. People ate. Traders got rich or at least well-traveled. As you step outside, you're nearly flattened by a runaway goat wearing a beaded collar. No one seems concerned. Girl with a basket full of cassava roots nods politely and keeps walking. The chaos here is rehearsed, like a performance that's been running for generations. You catch sight of a salt priest, yes, that's a thing, wearing ceremonial robes dusted with white. He stands beneath an arch of palm leaves, blessing the salt destined for royal kitchens. You're told this ensures digestive mercy. You briefly consider asking for a blessing yourself, but remember the cassava from earlier and decide against tempting fate. In the shadows of a nearby alley, a small group gathers around a gambling pit. Salt bricks are stacked in the center, stakes, for a game involving carved bone dice and an excessive amount of shouting. One man throws his hands up and storms off, muttering about cheaters and ghosts. Another pats the bricks like they're old friends. Tesfaye drags you away before you get any ideas. Salt is for trade, he warns, not for chance. Then he winks, unless the odds are really good. You help him make the final exchanges for the day: salt for barley, salt for firewood, salt for a curved knife he insists is cursed, but in a useful way. As the sun dips low, casting gold across the water, he sighs deeply and says, "Tomorrow we return." That night, you sit on the dock with your feet dangling just above the water. A camel snores behind you, and the stars flicker overhead, like they're trying to say something but can't quite decide on the words. You think about everything salt has touched: food, money, medicine, faith. You remember a story Tesfaye told you about a king who used to bathe in salted goat milk to ward off envy. He died of envy anyway, Tesfaye had added, but his skin, glorious. A breeze picks up, soft and warm. The sea sighs. Somewhere, someone sings a song you don't understand, but it makes you feel like maybe, just maybe, you belong here. Morning comes quietly. The air is thick with salt and wood smoke, and the camel refuses to get up until you bribe it with dried dates and a muttered apology for whatever you may have said in your sleep. Tesfaye insists you head inland today away from the noise back to the quiet hum of the highlands, where salt doesn't just circulate through markets, but through myth, medicine, and memory. As you travel, the road narrows. The ocean is a memory now, replaced by winding paths cut through eucalyptus forests. The scent of crushed leaves follows you, sharp and calming. Here, the conversation turns to folklore. Tesfaye begins naturally with a ghost. There is a woman, he says, who died carrying a brick of salt to her wedding. Her spirit walks these hills, searching for the groom who never showed. They say if you leave a pinch of salt on a stone at sunset, she will not trouble you. You try it? Just in case. The land here seems to remember things. You pass shrines built into rock faces, each with a smooth indentation where people have left salt over generations, offerings to spirits, ancestors, or perhaps just the habit of hope. One sight is particularly striking: a tree wrapped in strips of red cloth, each tied by someone hoping to cure illness, heartache, or stubborn goats. Beneath it, A dish filled with white crystals glints in the sun. Salt for the soul. Tesfaye murmurs, almost reverently. Historians still argue whether these practices originated from ancient trade customs or spiritual systems older than the bricks themselves. Either way, the presence of salt in these rituals suggests it was more than commerce. It was covenant. You stop in a hillside village where the homes are painted with clay symbols, spirals, eyes, animals. A healer greets you, her head wrapped in teal linen, her fingers stained orange from a root you can't name. She invites you to sit by a fire, then prepares a brew using hot water, eucalyptus, and a pinch of salt. She calls it breath tea. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like steam and bravery. Later, she shows you a worn manuscript pages bound with leather and patched with what appears to be goat hide. The script is faded, but she traces it as she speaks. Salt wards fever. Salt calms the womb. Salt seals the wound. Her voice is steady, almost sung. You wonder how many generations memorized those lines before anyone wrote them down. Young boy nearby is told to fetch a cleansing stone. He returns with a pebble, which the healer rubs with salt, then presses to your palm. For clarity, she says. You feel clearer, possibly due to dehydration. The villagers tell stories of salt being used to test truth. Place it on the tongue of the accused, one elder explains. If they spit, they lie. If they swallow, they speak true. You ask if it works. He smiles, only when the salt is good. Even salt bricks take on identity here. Each village claims its own style-rounded corners, carved initials, sometimes even patterns pressed into the surface with cloth or stamp. They become signatures as much as currency, as if each brick carries not only weight but a whisper of the person who shaped it. As you watch the sun dip low again, a circle of elders gathers near a large fire. A woman plays a lyre carved from bone, while another sings a lament about a prince who traded his crown for one perfect brick of salt, only to lose it in a river. The fish became kings, the final line declares. You're not sure if it's a joke or a warning. The healer returns and gently marks your forehead with a thumb dipped in salt water. You don't ask what it means. Some things are better left mysterious. You sleep that night under a tree strung with wind chimes made from discarded salt fragments and cracked pottery. They tinkle softly whenever a breeze passes, like tiny memories catching their breath. It's a gentle reminder that salt in these hills is not just taste or trade. It's trust. It binds people to each other, to their land, to something older. Then roads or rulers. In the quiet, you hear Tesfaye snoring again. The camel, for once, is silent. Somewhere in the distance, maybe, just maybe, the ghost bride walks past without stopping. You awaken to the rhythmic clinking of metal on stone. Not an alarm, not a threat. Just a mason at work, reshaping the corner of a salt storage pit. You stretch under the wide sky and realize you've been here longer than you planned. Time seems to bend around salt. Or maybe salt bends around time. Today you're heading into the high plateau region, known more for monasteries and manuscripts than commerce. Tesfaye explains that while trade flourished on the desert routes, the scribes of the highlands recorded everything. Or at least what they found interesting. Salt, thankfully, made the cut. The path narrows again, climbing past mossy ridges and terraced hills where barley waves like a whisper. The air is cooler here, touched by altitude and a sense of reverence. You pass fields of thyme and buzzing bees, and then, quite suddenly, a square stone tower rises from the mist. An old monastery, still active, with a library older than your passport. Inside, you're greeted with quiet nods and sandalwood perfume. The head scribe is a man with cloud-white hair and inky thumbs who peers at you like you're a confusing manuscript. When Tesfaye mentions your interest in salt, the scribe chuckles. Then you are either very curious or very lost. He leads you down a corridor lined with shelves made of cedar. Every scroll, every stitched folio smells of smoke, leather, and the passing of many hands. Salt shows up everywhere, the scribe says, but rarely where you expect it. He pulls out a worn codex of bestiary. Among the lions and crocodiles is an entry on the salt rat, a mythical creature said to nest in rock crevices and weep crystals when startled. It's adorable and completely unproven. Some monks believe salt had a divine frequency. He continues, too much corrupts, too little weakens. Balance is sacred. You're shown a liturgical text with a marginal note, barely legible. Salt, gifted by the angel at Adwa, saves the blood. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, spiritual, or just misfiled under the wrong miracle. The scribe won't say. We're not in the business of conclusions, he mutters, just careful guesses. You spend the afternoon helping grind ink charcoal, gum, and salt, of course. It binds the pigment, they tell you, and keeps the words from fading. That's the thing about salt. It preserves not just food, but meaning. Memory. Outside, you watch a young apprentice etching a devotional verse into a slat of softened wood. If you sleep with salt beneath your tongue, she says shyly, you dream of answers. You make a mental note to try it. Later, when Tesfaye isn't watching, the monastery's courtyard holds a large basin, half buried in soil. An old brining vat, the scribe says. From before this was a monastery, it was a trader's way. Station, the salt stayed. We just added prayer. As evening settles, you're invited to a quiet meal, lentils, flatbread, and a ceremonial pinch of salt passed clockwise around the circle. No one speaks until every plate is touched. It's oddly comforting, like being part of something older than politeness. You ask about salt theft, surely a temptation given its value. The scribe shrugs. Salt taken unjustly spoils its user. You assume this is metaphor, but Tesfaye won't eat from his hand. The rest of the night. Later, the scribe tells a parable about a man who buried his salt bricks in a cave, then forgot which cave it was. Years passed. When he finally found them again, they'd fused into a single glimmering boulder. He built a chair from it, the scribe says, smiling, and sat in silence until the salt crumbled. You ask if the story's true. He grins. No one sits on salt for long. It remembers discomfort. You sleep in a stone cell with a salt lamp burning low beside the door. It casts strange shadows, but you don't mind. You've grown used to the taste of things that don't quite make sense. In the silence of the mountains, the stories hum louder. And salt sits at the center, patient and pale, waiting for you to understand it. Morning comes gently in the highlands, stitched with mist and the smell of damp thyme. You're on the move again, following a path that loops downhill like an unwinding scroll. The landscape is softer now, green valleys cupped between rocky ridges, with herds of shaggy cattle grazing under watchful herders in saffron tunics. You nibble at a hunk of barley bread as Tesfaye explains today's mission. The salt census. In a nearby village, every household participates in what's essentially a giant slow-motion inventory: who has salt, how much, where it came from, and whether it's been paid for. It's not about taxation. It's about ritual and logistics. Salt isn't just a substance here, it's a trust system. You arrive at the edge of the village, where children are making castles out of discarded salt crumbs, white, gray, pink, and one that looks suspiciously like petrified cheese. You're ushered into the square, where elders sit on carved stools beneath a woven awning. One has a slate board, another a tally stick, and between them a stack of thin, brittle salt bricks, some stamped, others scored with personal markings. The census begins not with questions, but with stories. Each family recounts when and how they acquired their salt, traded for honey, gifted after a wedding, purchased at the donkey market 3 valleys east. One man swears he found his brick wedged in a tree trunk after a lightning storm. A sign, he whispers. Historians still argue whether this was coincidence or a well-placed prank involving smugglers and goats. Sesfe translates the less mumbly bits for you, but honestly, it's more of a pageant than an audit. Salt is displayed like heirloom silver. One woman unwraps a packet from layers of embroidered cloth to reveal a brick no larger than a loaf of bread but polished smooth from generations of handling. Wedding salt, she says, placing it gently on the table. No one speaks for a moment. Some bricks are chipped, others pristine. A few are clearly fake pressed from gypsum or chalk, but no one calls them out directly. Instead, the elder scribbles a polite note and thanks the owner for their creative presentation. You suspect this is code for nice try. There's a man with a tattoo of a salt brick on his forearm beside the name of his favorite donkey. Another with salt crusted into the seams of his sandals. For good footing, he claims, though his limp suggests otherwise. One teenager flashes a pouch of salt flakes he calls crystal confetti and insists it's the future of trade. He's laughed out of the square, but only gently. You notice that while the salt bricks vary wildly in size and quality, no one seems terribly concerned. This isn't about standardization. It's about memory. Each piece has a story, a fingerprint, a trail. Salt is the only currency that sweats Dot at one point. The tally elder pulls out a knife, not to threaten anyone, but to test a suspiciously light brick. A single tap, and it breaks apart like cake. Pressed ash, she mutters. Used to be a problem. Then she turns to you, eyes twinkling. But who would fake salt for real? Only a fool. Tesfaye coughs delicately and looks away. The village dogs have caught the scent of meat somewhere. Someone's grilling goat, and the square begins to empty. Salt senses concluded not with ceremony, but with the irresistible pull of lunch. You trail after Tesfaye, past households where salt bricks sit on mantels beside family portraits and faded icons. One house has a salt brick wrapped in holy cloth, its corners blackened from candle soot. Used during birth and death rites, the owner says. We sprinkle it on the threshold. As you chew through a plate of spiced lentils, you realize something strange. No two people in this village seem to use salt the same way. Some keep it in baskets. Others bury it. A few even crumble it into tiny jars for travel. But everyone treats it like it matters. Later, in a hut-turned archive, you flip through palm leaf manuscripts that list centuries of salt trades and symbols only Tesfaye can half-translate. Looks like this family traded salt for a flute. He mutters, and this one for 7 hens in a mirror. Wait, maybe a mirror shaped like a hen? He shrugs. Numbers get slippery over time. The salt census, you realize, isn't really about quantity. It's about lineage. Proof. A communal way of saying, we were here, we traded, we mattered. By sunset, the tally slate has been tucked away, the salt returned to cupboards and cloths, and the square is filled with slow, contented chatter. A child hands you a pebble of rock salt wrapped in dried leaves. For your journey, she says, it lasts longer than bread. You nod solemnly as if you've always known this. Which by now you kind of have. You leave the village before dawn the next day, your borrowed donkey blinking sleepily in the indigo light. Tesfaye, wrapped in a deep russet shawl, walks beside you humming a tune that's somewhere between a lullaby and a marching song. The trail turns east now, toward a region known for its strange barter markets, places where salt is currency, but only on certain days, and only after a kind of ritualized exchange that feels more theater than commerce. By mid-morning, you crest a ridge and look down into a shallow basin filled with movement. The market is already in full swing, rows of woven mats unfurled like giant game boards, each topped with goods, bundles of straw, carved combs, linen cloth, clay pots, dried peppers. There are no signs, no booths, just color and commotion, punctuated by the bark of traders and the low thump of goat hooves on packed earth. Your arrival draws no attention. Newcomers are expected. What isn't expected is that you're not carrying salt. Tesfaye mutters something about outsider amnesty and buys a pouch of dried figs to serve as your placeholder. Just don't point too much, he adds. They'll think you're pricing goats. You walk the rows slowly. Salt bricks appear here and there, stacked in pairs beside piles of onions, resting on a patterned scarf like jewels, cradled in a carved bowl as if for offerings. But no one haggles. Salt is never bargained. It's either accepted or politely ignored. At one mat, an old woman in a teal headscarf arranges 3 small salt bricks in a triangle. In front of them, she places a wooden flute. Tesfaye explains. Her grandson wants to marry. He needs the flute for the courting ceremony, but she wants to be sure it's a proper one made from cedar, not cane. Apparently, this decision will take the rest of the morning. Elsewhere, a man has drawn a line in the dirt and placed a chunk of obsidian on one side, a salt brick on the other. A silent standoff. According to Tesfaye, this is a long-form trade. The items remain on display until one party relents and either adds a sweetener or walks away. Could take hours, he says. Or days. Historians still argue whether these rituals stem from ancient trade taboos, clan politics, or sheer theatrical flair. Some suggest they began as a way to discourage aggressive bartering, replacing it with symbolic gestures and trust. Others think it was about status only. The patient trader is a serious one. You kneel at a mat where a young boy is drawing symbols in ash beside a brick of salt. He's listing what he'll trade it for, Tesfaye whispers. 3 combs. A jar of honey or a story. You glance up. A story? Tesfaye nods. Some people trade in tailies here. A good one is worth more than a chicken. The boy looks at you expectantly, and you panic, blurting out a mangled version of Hansel and Gretel only in your version. They escape not with breadcrumbs, but with salt pebbles that glow when near witches. He stares, then solemnly pushes the brick toward you. He accepts, Tesfaye says, eyes twinkling. Congratulations. You're now carrying market-verified salt. You tuck it into your pouch, strangely proud. Lunch is roasted grain wrapped in banana leaves, eaten cross-legged near a shady acacia tree. Around you, transactions continue with no money changing hands. One trader gives away a brick of salt entirely, asking only for a blessing in return. The recipient bows, chants a few soft words, and presses their forehead to the salt. Some salt bricks are marked with wax seals, others with hand-drawn emblems, birds, spirals, the occasional tooth. Tesfaye points out one brick etched with a fish. Means it was traded during the rainy season. From the north. Extra valuable because it traveled far. You hold it up to your nose. It smells faintly of earth and smoke. As the afternoon lengthens, the market quiets. Deals are done. Salt has changed hands, sometimes with drama, more often with nods and quiet smiles. A woman sings a lullaby to her goat while packing up her goods. Another traces her finger along the edge of a newly acquired salt brick as if memorizing its shape. The air cools. Traders begin to leave in small groups, donkeys laden with baskets and bundles. You and Tesfaye follow the path out of the basin, your newly acquired brick of salt tucked carefully between 2 fig leaves. You feel oddly responsible for it, like it might crumble if you think too loudly. As twilight falls, Tesfaye breaks the silence. You did well, he says. Most people get swindled their first time. You laugh. Even with a fairy tale? He shrugs. Especially with a fairy tale. Stories are sacred here. They flavor the salt. You glance back once, watching the last of the market disappear behind a ridge. Its dust rising into the dusk like smoke signals from some ancient performance that's been playing for centuries. In a world without coins or calculators, you realize salt does something magical. It forces people to slow down, to talk, to look each other in the eyes. The rules aren't written, but they're known. Like songs everyone learns in childhood. You can't imagine trying to rush a salt deal. That would be like hurrying through a meal with your grandmother. Technically possible, but deeply frowned upon. As you and Tesfaye pitch your tent under a blanket of stars, you run your fingers over the edge of your story-bought salt brick. It's rough and cold, heavy with meaning. And you smile. You just might sleep soundly tonight with a brick of ancient value tucked gently beneath your head. Morning mist curls low across the plains as you and Tesfaye trudge onward, the salt brick safely bundled in cloth and stored in your pack like some sacred relic. You're not quite sure what you'll do with it, but now that you have it, you can't help feeling slightly wealthier. In a deeply medieval way, today's road winds through old caravan paths, barely visible now but still whispered about in market songs and fireside tales. Tesfaye explains that long ago, salt caravans stretched for miles like desert serpents, shimmering across the hills. Hundreds of men, camels, and donkeys, all bound together by the promise of a mineral that didn't sparkle but could buy you a wife, a sword, or the best goat in 3 provinces. As the haze lifts, you pass the remnants of a caravan halt, a collapsed stone hut, a broken water trough, a few scorched cooking stones. It's quiet, but Tesfaye crouches beside a groove in the earth. "See this?" he says, running a finger along it. "That's camel wear. Too smooth for rain, too shallow for human feet. This was a salt stop." He grins. "A good one, too flat near shade and just off the hyena path." You wonder how long it's been since someone last passed this way with salt bricks wrapped in woven rope and goat hide. 50 years? 200? Historians still argue whether these caravan routes were mapped with precision or evolved from rumor and trial. Some scholars claim ancient guides passed down directions in poetic verses, "Turn where the acacia sings," or "Walk until your sandals weep." Others believe the routes followed herding paths, improvised day by day depending on rainfall and safety. You hike on, the trail flanked by spiny brush and occasional wind-sculpted rocks. Tesfaye begins a story, half in chant, half in laughter, about a merchant who lost his salt load to bandits disguised as priests. He begged for their blessings, Tesfaye says, and they blessed his entire donkey into their saddlebags. Your legs ache, but you don't really notice. The rhythm of the walk, the gentle creak of your pack, and the whisper of Tesfaye's voice blend into something almost meditative. You begin to understand why travelers once called the Salt Road a thinking path. There's nothing to do out here but walk, remember, and wonder. At midday, you come across a standing stone with an inscription too faded to read. Tesfaye says it marks an ancient toll point. Salt wasn't free to move, he explains. You had to pay tax. Even if your brick was cracked, even if it was stolen. If you were carrying it, you paid. He spits on the ground. Thieves love salt, doesn't smell like loot, but it trades like gold. You pause under a knotted fig tree for shade and lunch flatbread, goat cheese, and honey. The salt brick makes a fine table weight. You joke about carving your initials into it. And Tesfaye looks horrified. Salt holds memory, he says. You mark it, it marks you. You decide to keep your cutlery away. As you continue, the trail narrows between tall grasses, and the air turns sweet with wild herbs. Bees drift lazily between thistle blooms. Insects hum in a slow, contented drone like monks chanting vespers. The silence deepens. You pass a half-buried cache of broken salt bricks, white slabs fractured like bone, scattered beside a rusted tin pot. Tesfaye kneels, brushing dust away. Offerings, he says. People leave salt here for the spirits of lost traders, so they don't haunt the road. You stare, unsure if he's teasing. His face says no doubt it's the kind of thing that probably never made it into official records. No parchment account of why someone might break their brick. On purpose, whisper a name and walk away lighter. But the habit persisted. Maybe it's not about ghosts. Maybe it's about grief, or guilt, or a superstition passed down because it gave the next traveler courage. You push onward. The path forks, then rejoins itself. Test for honesty. Tesfaye mutters. Anyone carrying true salt will return to the same trail. Anyone false will get lost. You nod solemnly, as if you've always known this. By late afternoon, the sun tips low, staining the rocks with amber light. You spot a cluster of nomads in the distance, figures wrapped in ochre and navy wool, tending to lean camels with haunted eyes. Tesfaye greets them with a high whistle, and they nod, but say little. A few bricks of salt sit atop a blanket between them. You don't ask their price. Instead, a small girl toddles over and points at your pouch. You open it carefully. She peers in, then looks up at you with a grin, exposing two perfect baby teeth. Tesfaye chuckles. She knows salt when she sees it. You leave a fig for her, and she toddles back, clutching it like treasure. As dusk approaches, you crest one final hill, and the world opens. A lake lies below, ringed with reeds and shining like hammered silver. Tesfaye sighs. We made it. He points to a small structure at the water's edge. That's the Salt Lodge. Pilgrims stay there. And so do dreamers. You reach the lodge just as the stars begin to blink alive. A fire crackles, someone singing. And you realize your legs are sore, your salt is safe, and your heart feels strangely full. Maybe it's the salt. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the road itself. But for the first time in days, you forget what time it is, and you don't mind at all. You wake to the sound of birdsong, clear and calm, as if each chirp has been dipped in honey and served warm. The Salt Lodge is little more than a one-room shelter, walls of sun-dried brick, a thatched roof, and a lingering scent of smoke and crushed sage. But after days of journeying, it feels like a palace. Tesfaye is already outside, crouched beside the fire, stirring something that smells suspiciously like barley porridge mixed with forest. You stretch, step out, and the morning air kisses your skin, cool, thin, filled with the kind of quiet that settles in the bones. Today, you're not walking. Not yet. Instead, Tesfaye has plans to show you how salt isn't just currency, it's ceremony. You're going to witness what he calls a block blessing, a rare, if informal, ritual done only when a trader completes their first full journey from mine to market without losing a brick. Apparently. That's you. It starts at the lakeside. You and Tesfaye carry the salt down a winding path lined with dry grasses and smooth stones. He says this lake has seen thousands of salt bricks, though none ever float. Salt belongs to earth, not sky, he says, almost reverently. The surface of the water shimmers gold, disturbed only by a slow-moving heron stepping through the shallows like a monk late to prayer. At the edge, Tesfaye takes a moment. He places your brick of amole onto a flat stone and traces a circle around it with a mixture of ash and crushed herbs. Then he hums a low, tuneless murmur that feels older than language. You're not sure if you're supposed to join, so you stay quiet, watching. He pours a splash of water over the salt, not to dissolve it, but to wake it. The droplet spreads, darkening the surface, and for a brief second, the salt looks alive, veined, pulsing, Then it's still again. Tesfaye dips his finger in ochre powder and dots the corners of the brick, nodding once, as if acknowledging it like an old friend. Historians still argue whether such rituals had official religious meaning or were just folk practices wrapped in local legend. Some anthropologists claim they were meant to cleanse the salt of desert spirits picked up along the route. Others believe it was a psychological trick making traders feel more bonded to their wares, less likely to sell or waste them. Either way, you're in it now. You and Tesfaye sit beside the lake as he explains that in his grandfather's time, traders would sometimes whisper to their salt at night, telling it stories, confessing secrets. Salt listens, he says, with a shrug. Doesn't talk back, but it keeps things. You look at your block differently now. It's not just payment. It's memory in mineral form. After the ritual, you walk through the nearby hamlet, where homes made of stone and thatch huddle like old neighbors. Children run barefoot, laughing. Chickens peck under wide clay jars. A woman is drying fish on a woven mat. The smell is strong enough to startle a goose mid-honk. Tesfaye shows you the village salt house. A cool, dark room lined with narrow shelves, each holding bricks tagged with tiny cloth tokens. Not all salt gets sold right away, he says. Sometimes it waits, like letters with no address. He gestures to one particularly large brick with a chip in the corner. That one came from a man who walked all the way from Afdera. 3 weeks. Then he fell sick and left it with us. Never came back. He doesn't elaborate. You don't ask. Later, you're invited to a meal with a family Tesfaye knows. The centerpiece? A stew of lentils and bitter greens served with flatbread and a dish of salted goat curd. It's pungent and delicious. The salt, Tesfaye tells you, came from your mine. Might be your cousin, he jokes. You dip your bread with reverence. Around the fire, stories are shared of traders tricked by mirages, of salt stolen by baboons, of a man who tried to eat his own brick during a famine. Didn't help, the storyteller says, grinning, but his burps were worth bottling. You ask if anyone's ever tried to counterfeit salt. Tesfaye raises his eyebrows. Once, he says, mixed with flour and gypsum. Looked real. Tasted like betrayal. He says the forger's donkeys refuse to carry the fake bricks. Donkeys know. They always know. Evening comes, and the sky paints itself in wine red and saffron. Tesfaye points out stars. That one? Salt Star. Guides caravans. At least, that's what my uncle said. He also said eating too much salt makes your dreams louder. Maybe he was. Right. As the fire dies down, you pull your cloak tighter. The salt brick rests beside you, warm from the day and oddly comforting. It feels like a companion now, not just a block of mineral wealth, but a witness to everything you've seen, heard, and tasted. And when Tesfaye yawns and stretches and says, tomorrow, we walk again, you nod without hesitation. You're not done yet. The next morning begins not with birdsong, but with wind dry and curious, tugging at your sleeves like a child asking questions. You pack quietly, slipping the now smooth salt brick into a woven satchel. It doesn't feel like a burden anymore. It feels like a page from your journal, but heavier and more honest. Tesfaye leads the way, humming something tuneless. The path leaves the village behind and cuts through low scrubland where acacia trees bend like gossiping elders and the ground glints faintly with crushed quartz. You walk in silence for a while, the rhythm of your boots matching the rhythm of your breath. Today's destination is something Tesfaye calls the crossroads. Not a literal intersection of highways, of course. This is Ethiopia. Not Los Angeles, but a market where multiple salt routes converge like tributaries flowing into a dusty river of trade. Traders from different regions gather here, not just to exchange salt, but stories, news, advice, sometimes insults. The crossroads is no town, just an open stretch of ground with a few ragged tents, piles of goods, and the smell of camel sweat and roasted grain. You arrive just before noon when the sun begins its daily act of betrayal, heating the earth until even the ants retreat. Still, the place is buzzing. One man, barefoot and grinning, tries to sell you a magic stone that looks suspiciously like a potato. A woman in layers of ochre and indigo fans herself with a palm leaf while bartering for spices. A cluster of children crowd around a foreign trader who's brought actual sugar cubes wrapped in cloth. They stare at them like rare jewels. Tesfaye gestures for you to stay close. Crossroads have everything, he says, even trouble. Here, your salt brick isn't a relic or a ritual object. It's currency again. A merchant with sunburned cheeks eyes it as if it were a roast chicken. Another sniffs, shrugs, and offers you dried figs in trade. You decline not because you dislike figs, but because you're starting to understand value in more than just hunger. A debate breaks out nearby two men, both claiming the same brick. One insists he carved the maker's mark himself. The other says it was stolen during a sandstorm. They shout, gesture, and eventually, someone brings over a gray-haired woman who examines the salt, nods slowly, and declares, "This was made at Tarka. See the groove?" No one from Afdera makes grooves that deep. The crowd murmurs in agreement. Just like that, the case is settled. You realize salt has fingerprints, regional quirks. A salt sommelier might even say terroir. Historians still argue whether these methods of identification were learned or instinctive. Some think entire families specialized in carving distinct notches into their bricks, a mineral signature passed down like a surname. Others argue it was just an accident of technique replicated out of habit. Either way, it worked. You walk further into the market and find a shaded corner where a man named Bitialu sharpens iron tools beside a crate of amole bricks. He's part blacksmith, part gossip column. He recognizes Tesfaye immediately and greets him with a hug that nearly folds him in half. Bakalu invites you both to sit. Over shared sips of tepid tea, he shows you something strange. An old coin minted during the reign of Menelik II, nestled inside a hollowed salt brick. Found this? Inside a cracked one, he says. Someone hid it or forgot it. Salt remembers, but not always kindly. You ask if hiding things in salt is common. Bikalu shrugs. Not anymore. But back when raiders hunted the roots, sometimes your best bank was a thing no one would think to steal. He bites into a roasted corn cob with alarming confidence. Unless they were hungry and confused. As the afternoon melts into gold, you begin to see how salt changes depending on who holds it. To a priest, it might purify. To a mother, it's seasoned soup. To a merchant, it's a gamble. To a thief, a heavy prize. To a child, just something to lick on a dare. There's a young girl selling woven bracelets nearby. She doesn't say much, but watches you like she's memorizing the way foreigners breathe. You offer her a pinch of crushed salt from your pouch, and her eyes widen. Not because it's rare, but because it's pure. Too white, she says, laughing. No flavor. You learn that some locals prefer dirty salt tinged with clay or dust. Tastes like where it came from, Tesfaye says. Clean salt is for city mouths. Real salt is for us. That night, after the traders pack up and the goats finally calm down, a few travelers gather near a fire. Someone plays a simple flute 3 notes, repeated, and a man with no front teeth begins to recite a tale about a salt brick that fell in love with a river rock. It's absurd and yet strangely beautiful. As you lie on your mat, head pillowed on a spare tunic, you can still hear the flute, still taste the tea, still feel the warmth of salt against your side. It's just a block. Just sodium and history. pressed into shape. But it's also part of a story that's still unfolding, and now you're in it too. By now, you don't even flinch at the crunch of salt beneath your sandals. It's become background music like wind in a cracked window or the clink of spoons in a quiet cafe. You've walked far, traded little, and absorbed much. Tisfe has taken you further inland now, tracing the ghost of a once great trade path that, according to him, only fools and poets still follow. You suppose you're somewhere between the two. The landscape changes again, less scrub, more shadows. Rocky outcrops jet like the broken teeth of the earth, and small stone cairns appear along the path. You're told they're waymarkers, offerings to ancestral spirits, or possibly just trail signs made by bored herders. No one agrees. That's half the charm. At midday, you rest beneath a jagged ridge. Tisfe pulls out a leather pouch and unwraps a small worn scroll likely copied by hand generations ago. This, he says, tapping the faded ink, is from a time when salt wasn't just trade, it was law. You squint. The text is in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language. You can't read it, but Tisfe translates slowly, reverently. The scroll contains what appears to be an old salt edict, a royal decree regulating the price and movement of salt in the kingdom. The king said 1 brick for 1 goat. Tisfe chuckles. Imagine that today. Historians still argue whether such laws were strictly enforced or more ceremonial in nature. Some scholars believe these decrees were symbolic, reminding traders that salt fell under divine jurisdiction. Others suggest they were clever tools of propaganda, reminding subjects that even the mountains owed tax to the throne. You learn that in some Ethiopian courts, salt was used not just for barter, but as a tool of justice. Litigants might offer salt bricks to judges as part of ritual pledges. In other tales, false witnesses were made to swallow small lumps of salt, believing it would expose lies by drying out their throats. Salt never lies. Tisfe murmurs, tossing a grain onto the wind. Later, in a crumbling village barely clinging to the hillside, an old man beckons you inside a tiny stone chamber. The air smells of dust, cumin, and old boots. He opens a wooden chest and shows you a row of bricks stacked neatly like books on a shelf. Most are chipped, some stamped with crude symbols. A few glisten with mica. These are my father's, he says, and his father's. You realize he's showing you a family archive not of words but of minerals. Generations of wealth preserved not in coins or titles, but in chunks of salt. You ask why he keeps them. He shrugs. To remember who we were, and in case I get old and hungry. It hits you that in a world before banknotes and credit scores, memory was measured in mass. Legacy could be stacked and wrapped and hidden in floorboards. You wonder what modern currency might smell like in a century. Plastic? Regret? Out in the courtyard, a woman is boiling river water to extract salt. The shallow pans shimmer in the sun like tiny mirrors. You ask her how long it takes. 3 days, she says. Longer if the clouds gossip too much. She's using a method unchanged for century sun evaporation in clay vessels. Her hands are calloused, her tunic streaked with fine white dust. She doesn't speak much, but she hums. You catch the melody from the other night, the salt brick and the river rock. It's older than any song you know. Tisfe buys one of her bricks, smaller and less uniform than yours. He says it's for his wife. She doesn't care for the trade salt, he explains, too proud. She likes hers made by women. You ask what difference it makes. Tisfe grins. Flavor. And soul? As the sun dips behind the ridge, painting everything in ochre and rose, you help carry buckets to the drying hut. It's small, filled with rattan trays and muslin cloths. Salt is drying on every surface. It feels like stepping into a bakery. Of minerals, warm, sharp, faintly sacred. One tray holds salt shaped into animals, a goat, a lion, something that might be a crocodile. You're told these are ceremonial, given as wedding gifts or laid on graves, sometimes just made for fun. Even salt gets bored, a boy says, smirking. There's a tenderness in how this village handles its salt. It isn't just resource, it's rhythm. Boil, wait, dry, stack, trade, and repeat. They don't chase profit here. They chase preservation. That night, you share injera and lentils around a communal fire. The stars are aggressive close, bright, insistent. Someone passes around a gourd of honey wine. Someone else begins a quiet chant. You recognize no words, and yet your body relaxes like it's always known the tune. A young girl asks if salt grows on trees in your country. You try to explain oceans and mines and overproduction, but she's already moved on, playing with a sheepdog's tail. Maybe it's better that way. You fall asleep on a woven mat beneath a faded curtain embroidered with birds. Somewhere in the dark, salt dries. Somewhere else, a merchant counts bricks by moonlight. And in a drawer in your pack, one small piece remains warm from your pocket. The trade continues, whether you walk or sleep. Salt waits for no one. By now, your pace has slowed not out of fatigue, exactly, but something closer to reverence. The salt bricks no longer seem like oddities or dusty relics. They feel like quiet geometric echoes of every transaction, tradition, and trek that came before. You begin to notice them everywhere, not just as trade goods, but as metaphors, pillars, anchors, promises. Tesfaye takes you higher into the highlands, to a plateau where clouds skirt low over the heather and giant lobelias sway like prehistoric chandeliers. Up here, the air is thin and tastes faintly of iron. The sky, impossibly wide. Even the salt seems humbled. You arrive at a monastery tucked into the mountain, carved partly from the rock and partly from what looks like time itself. A rust-colored monk greets you with a nod, his eyes twinkling with the quiet mischief of a man who has heard every question and decided. Most aren't worth answering. He offers you warm tea steeped with salt and wild thyme. You sip it politely. It tastes like boiled ocean and rain-drenched bark, and somehow ... like truth. Inside the chapel, there are no pews, just smooth stone and the lingering scent of beeswax and myrrh. A small niche holds a single salt brick wrapped in faded red cloth. You ask why. The monk shrugs. It's older than the hymns, he says. Some say it was blessed by a saint. Some say it was used to ransom a king. Historians still argue whether such claims are allegory or exaggerated folk memory. But the brick is there, real and heavy with its own quiet authority. Tesfaye kneels briefly, then gestures to a mural that's nearly vanished, blues faded to whisper, gold leaf long since flaked. But the outline remains, a procession of figures carrying salt on their backs, halos faint behind their heads. Saints? Traders? No one knows. Later, as you help gather water from a spring near the cliffs, the monk tells you about the salt saints, travelers who gave up wealth and land to become guardians of the trade paths. They offered protection, food, guidance. In return, they asked only that the salt arrive safely, because, as one proverb goes, a road without salt is just a trail of forgetting. That night, the wind howls like an argument between gods. You wrap yourself in wool and sip more tea. The stars blink lazily, and somewhere deep in the rock, water seeps and trickles in rhythms older than empire. The next morning, you begin your descent back toward lower elevations, back toward heat and bustle and the clamor of trade. The journey down is slower, not from exertion but from the gravitational pull of reflection. Tesfaye is quiet too, humming only now and then, as if narrating the thoughts he prefers not to voice. You stop in a town known for its markets, where donkeys still outnumber motorcycles and the air smells like cardamom and rust. Here, the salt. Trade has taken on a new face. Packaging. Bricks are shaved, polished, and sometimes even stamped with decorative sigils. One merchant shows you a velvet-lined case of ceremonial salts, tiny bricks meant for display in weddings, births, or the founding of a business. Some are infused with herbs, others dyed with natural pigments, crimson from hibiscus, pale green from crushed mint. You raise a brow at Tesfaye. This wasn't in the mountains, he shrugs. The cities always add a little theater. Another vendor sells salt fortunes, small slips of parchment baked inside hollowed-out bricks. You buy one and crack it open. It reads, "Beware cheap cheese and loud advice." You're unsure if that's wisdom or warning, but it feels applicable. Either way, you wander past a stall selling old ledgers, books from merchant families who once rode the trails you now retrace. One page, dated 2 centuries ago, notes a trade. 4 bricks for a copper pot, 3 bricks for a live rooster, 1 brick and a story for a favor. You ask about the story. The bookseller smirks. Never recorded, only spoken. You nod. Of course. That evening, Tesfaye introduces you to his cousin, a quiet man with salt-bleached hair and a collection of antique measuring scales. Some are calibrated for spices, others for gold. But his favorite, he says, is the salt scale, 2 pans carved from horn, suspended by braided silk, precise enough to tip for a single grain. He lets you try it. It's absurdly delicate. A breath could shift the balance, you see? He says, trade is not just weight, it is patience. You stay one last night above the shop, curled on a cot that creaks like old thoughts. You dream of salt, of course falling from the sky like snow, shaped into animals and altars, burning gently in ancient fires. When you wake, the world smells sharper like sweat and hope. You pack your bag, check your brick, and stretch your legs for the last stretch. At the edge of the town, you pass a child playing with what looks like a toy block. Except it's not wood or stone. It's a small cube of salt, carved with what you recognize as the same stamp from Tesfaye's family. You glance at him. He grins. We trade, we teach, he says. That's how salt stays alive. You leave the last town behind like a closing bracket, the salt bricks snug in your pack and your thoughts heavier than the road beneath your feet. The landscape flattens again, less drama, more rhythm. Rolling hills, scattered shrubs, the occasional goat chewing contemplatively at nothing in particular. The sky is wide and windless, and even the birds seem to respect the silence. It's here, in the long exhale of your journey, that you begin to piece things together. Not as a scholar too many missing pages. Not as a trader too little hustle in your stride. But as a quiet observer, someone who's seen the salt at rest and in motion, sacred and mundane, priced and priceless. You think back to the beginning, the markets, the caravans, the early bartering. The salt wasn't just currency. It was identity. To carry salt was to carry trust. To give it was to mark a transaction not just of goods, but of memory, of promise. Historians still argue whether salt ever truly functioned as money in the way we understand coins or bills, but you've seen its weight, felt its worth. You remember Tesfaye saying, "It is not what salt buys, it is what it preserves." It sticks with you now, not just because it sounds poetic, but because it's true. Salt preserves more than meat. It preserves roots, customs, names, even myths. You stop at a quiet bend in the path, where acacia trees throw dappled shade and the wind finally finds its voice again. There's a stone bench here, worn smooth by years of travelers who needed to rest or maybe just to think. You sit, unwrap your brick, and hold it in your lap. It's lighter than it was at first. Whether from wear or from meaning changing weight, you can't say. A man trudges past with a mule trailing behind, sacks bulging with firewood. He nods politely and points at your brick. Trade? You laugh. Not today. He nods again as if that was the right answer. Or maybe it wasn't a question. You watch him disappear into the horizon, his sandals raising small clouds of dust, the mule's tail swishing a tired rhythm. Behind you, a line of ants hauls sugar crystals toward a cracked mud mound. Each ant moves like it's part of something bigger, unaware of trade or currency or civilization. Just driven by purpose. You consider your salt again. What is it now? A relic? A souvenir? A symbol? Or just a brick? Maybe it's all of those. Maybe the point was never what salt is, but what it connects. At dusk, you arrive back at the edge of the first town, the one with the market and the brick press and the bold boys juggling their future like it owes them nothing. You wave at the familiar vendor with the crooked scales. He squints, recognizes you, and raises a thumb. You step into a tea house where the air smells like mint and lemon peel. Tisfay is there, of course, pouring something hot into mismatched cups. He slides one across the table before you even sit down. So? He asks. You smile. So? It's all the answer you need. The salt brick rests on the table beside your hand. A few grains have chipped off one lands in your tea. You drink anyway. It tastes like home. If home is a little strange and a little ancient and always slightly too warm, the shopkeeper lights a lantern. Outside, the last donkeys of the day pass by, hooves clapping against stone. A baby cries somewhere in the distance. A rooster, confused by the light, gives a half-hearted crow. You close your eyes, just for a second. Not to sleep, not yet, but to listen. To the past moving quietly through the present. To the long, steady rhythm of footsteps over time-worn roots. To the lullaby of currency made of earth. And now, let the journey slow. Let your shoulders sink just a little now. You've been walking for a long while through mountain passes and echoing markets, past incense-smudged temples and tea-soaked stories, and here you are, still and soft in the hush of night, surrounded not by noise but by the quiet weight of something deeply old, something lasting. The air is cooler now, not cold, just enough to nudge you deeper into the blankets. Fold. Outside your window, maybe there's a breeze or the hush of distant traffic. Maybe a night bird, maybe the click of a radiator. Or maybe just silence, curled up like a cat at the foot of your bed. You don't need to remember all the names or the dates or the spice-sweet trivia. You only need to remember the feeling, the click of a brick against wood, the glint of sun on carved edges, the way a man smiled when he knew the trade was fair. So many things in history are. Loud wars, empires, revolutions. But some of the most powerful were quiet. Salt carried in a satchel. A child whispering prices to learn her father's trade. A monk tucking a brick into cloth like it was scripture. Tonight, you carry that stillness with you. Heavy, but not burdensome. Ancient, but not forgotten. Close your eyes now. You've walked far enough for one night. Sleep well.